Public servants, thought leaders, and experts from across Canada are reflecting on the ideas shaping public service, leadership, policy, governance, innovation, and beyond. This is the Review and Reflection series, produced by the Canada School of Public Service.
Welcome to another edition of our Review and Reflection series at the Canada School of Public Service, where we talk with interesting and luminary Canadians. Today, as always, we have another treat for you. We have a Canadian icon. And most icons kind of make their name or their iconology in one area. Our guest has actually made his name in at least 3 different areas, and we'll talk about each of those through the course of our conversation. The first is in business, the second is in philanthropy, and the third is in public service, amongst others. Our guest today is Jim Balsillie. Jim, welcome.
Pleasure to be with you, Taiki.
Where were you born, sir?
I was born in Seaforth, Ontario. My father was in the Air Force at that time, and I was born there.
So forgive me, where is that? Northern Ontario, Southern Ontario?
No, it's kind of trending towards Lake Huron from London and places like that.
And what was the population?
I think a couple thousand, but I'm claimed as one of their luminaries on their website still to this day. I think Lloyd Eisler, the figure skater, is also from Seaforth, so something like that.
Did you grow up there?
No, we moved around. I grew up in Peterborough.
Peterborough.
Yeah.
What was roughly the population of Peterborough?
About 50 to 60,000 people.
Did it feel like a small town? Did it feel like a cosmopolitan center? What did it feel like?
Well,
to a
it's
young
all
Jim?
you know. So it's everything. And my high school graduating class was 44 people. So you're a bit of a bigger fish in a smaller pond, but which I think is good. It can be good.
And you said your dad was in the Air Force?
Yeah, he was an electrician.
And did that kind of impact you in any way? Did that help you think about jobs? Did it help you think about, math versus English, science versus humanities?
Well, he left the Air Force when I was very young, and he went to work. He worked for corporations and thereafter. So, no, and my mom was at home. I was always interested in business and definitely played with technology. I was very clever in math. So, yeah, you start to have a narrative that you can figure things out and that you will figure it out. So that lodged early.
So you mentioned 2 things that I want to touch upon briefly, entrepreneurial and math. Let's start with entrepreneurial. Like Warren Buffett and other people who made their mark in the business world, I read somewhere you had a few side gigs, as we call them today, when you were growing up, including a newspaper route?
Yeah, I had multiple newspaper routes when I was a kid, and then when I turned to grade 7, I worked on weekends from there on, and also worked in summers. So I was a liftie in the wintertime at ski lifts, which I did from grade 7 on. And yeah, I had just about every bad summer job you could imagine. So when people try to compete who had the worst summer jobs, they always have to compete for second place when they're around me. So.
The second one is math. Apparently you were pretty good at math.
Yes, I was.
Tell us about that.
I when I was in grade 7, I came first in Ontario for grade 7 and 8 in a math contest, and in the high school math contests, I think it's the grade. The first one's the Euclid or the Descartes. I think one's and I came in the top 10 in North America in the earlier one. I think it was a Euclid at the time. Yeah, so I was good at math. Yeah, good at logic.
Then well, fast forward a little bit. You ended up, I think, at the University of Toronto. And apologies to everybody who's not at the University of Toronto or who's hearing this, but you know, probably the best university in Canada, one of the best universities in the world. And you also were at a particular part of the University of Toronto that's considered prestigious. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I went to Trinity College. I had a friend whose father used to be Dean of Devonshire, which was the dorm right next to it, and he founded Trent University. So he told me the merits of Trinity, and yeah, so I applied and went there, and it was a formidable bunch of people. So first thought in my mind is, Dorothy, this is not Kansas anymore, and you start to raise your expectations of yourself.
And some of those people, like you, became household names. Who were some of them?
Yeah, I remember Malcolm Gladwell and I played 10 to 15 games of backgammon a day and kept score. He clobbered me, mopped the floor with me, and Nige Wright for sure was there, and Adam McGoyan, the filmmaker. So yeah, yeah, it was a formidable gang. And again, I would say the quality of your peer group, you revisit your expectations of what success looked like and what you should expect of yourself.
Do you remember any of the professors that particularly marked you in any ways?
Yeah, Myron Gordon, capital asset pricing model. He was kind of famous global in that. There were good, yeah. I remember my Harvard profs a little better at the time, but yeah, very, very good profs. And that was the era where the senior tenured profs tended to teach the courses, particularly the first year courses, the introductory ones. And Peter Russell was a prof of mine in political science.
Was a prof of mine too.
Yeah, Professor Carr for economics. Yeah, they were very, very, very formidable profs. So it was great. It seemed like that's the way a school should be.
Yeah, and I think when you were there, I think the economics program as it is today and the political science program as it is today were fused and called political economy. Or
Yeah.
had that been after?
I can't remember. I did an economic specialist. I did commerce and economics, so I did two specialists. So you had to take extra course load, and yeah. But there's this tremendous interrelationship between finance, management economics, microeconomics, and then macro is an aggregation of the micro. So yeah, they're all logical structures, and philosophy has logic in it. So I can't remember the actual structure about it. And then you get some of the trade type courses like accounting, tax.
Now, accounting, that was, I guess, the next big kind of, let's call it milestone in your professional life. You became a chartered accountant. Do you have a favorite accounting joke or a favorite accountant joke?
Well, yeah, sure. When an accountant meets an actuary at a party, how do you know which one's the accountant, which one's the actuary?
Can I tell you mine?
The accountant's the one with the personality.
Can I tell you mine?
Sure, fire away.
My favorite accounting joke is, how can you tell if an accountant is extroverted?
How?
He looks at somebody else's shoes. So then you worked for a little while, and then not long after that, I think you mentioned it, you ended up at Harvard. So how does a little kid from Peterborough and from a place a lot of us haven't heard of end up at Harvard?
Yeah, well, you just lock in and apply. And I was the first hire at Clarkson Gordon into their new entrepreneurial services group. So I was doing stuff there that was interesting. And I was elected president of the Chartered Accountant Students Association, and you had a staff of 6, and there was 5,000 members, all the people that are going through the training. And I was particularly interested, my application was how technology, which was emerging at the time, could be used to rewrite business rules for
What
opportunities.
years roughly was this?
I applied in 86, and and then went in 1987.
And do you remember any professors that
Yeah,
particularly
yeah,
marked
sure.
you?
I mean, Shoshana Zuboff was one of my profs, self-assessment, career development, Jack Cabarro, power and influence, competitive decision making, with Michael Porter, game theory with Professor Rafa. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And I kind of focused on what I would call the cross-cutting issues rather than siloization issues of better sales, better marketing, better product management. So I figured, I didn't want to compete on increments on the conventional stuff, but rather look for cross-cutting elements, and that was my kind of lens into how I wanted to get what I wanted to get at the business school.
And were there other Canadians there? Anybody we might have heard of,
Um,
or any other people that kind
There are
of?
lots of well-known Canadians uh, uh, have gone to the Harvard Business School. Not a lot have been bigger household names, but a couple of us. One guy I know very well is we did our independent study together, and we wanted to go into entrepreneurship. So Len Blavatnik and I were study partners in second year, and he went off to do the oil thing in Russia, and then Len's done all kinds of stuff. And I knew him when he's poor. He knew me when I was poor. And it's interesting because he went and named the school at Oxford, and the global affairs school that Nari Woods runs, and of course I did the one here. So he'd probably be one of them that people know better. But for the Canadians who really sort of, Eric LaFleche was there. He runs Metro, a couple others, but yeah, not a lot.
So when you graduated, you did something that I think was unusual. I would imagine most of the people that go to Harvard Business School say, yes, I'm done, and now I can go to a big, huge corporation. I can go to a big, huge global consultancy, and I'm on my way. You, I think, did something different.
Hmm. Yeah, I met a guy named Rick Brock who had an industrial automation business with very fledgling technology products and a contracting business. And he needed a CFO because they were controlled by a conglomerate who wanted to insert their guy. And also the technology products business was having trouble. And so he needed somebody to get their hands around it. And for me, it was an 800-person company, and I was really the number two in the company. To be an operator at a young age, at that time, I was 29, maybe, yeah, 29, I think so, 28, and 28. And to have that kind of operating role is very, very, is what I wanted, because you become creature of your environment very quickly. And if you're flying around in fancy hotels and fancy suits, your cost of living gets up, and then you're not really able to develop those kinds of skills. So that's why I took that, and yeah.
So you didn't become a financial engineer. You didn't become like a junk bond salesman. You actually went to an enterprise and you internalized.
Yeah, it's a very different skill. In a sense, I say to people, what's the difference between a $5,000 purchase order and a $5 million purchase order? And the answer is 3 zeros. It's basically the same. Or if you're, for a 1,000-store coffee chain, if you're in charge of buying cups, does that mean you can run a coffee store? But if you run a coffee store very well, then you could probably run 10. But can you actually manage the unit economic that is a store? And so I thought I could, but I'd never done it. And I wanted to see if I could do it. And that's the key, is, can you do it?
Now, shortly thereafter, this is where most Canadians start to hear your name and know after a little while who you are. You went to this little company called Research in Motion. How many employees were at Research in Motion when
There
you
was 8 or
started?
9. Mike was a supplier to the industrial products. I was in charge of it at Sutherland Schultz, where I was before, and it'd gone really well. It grew. It made a lot of money, so there was confidence there. And then RIM was in a financial pickle because they had a couple contracts where the customers weren't paying them, and it was more. I didn't realize how difficult it was, and so yeah, I agreed to mortgage a house and had a couple young kids and decided to go all in, take a big cut in pay to give it a go. And then I do remember putting the money in, and there was a bookkeeper at the time, and I said, "Yeah, where'd the money go?" And he says, "Oh, it's all gone. It was literally gone for pent up overdue payables." And it's like, well, okay, this is a one-way door. Like I'm in all the way, and there you go.
So this is less than a dozen people. We're
Yeah,
gonna
that was 92.
yeah. So we're gonna go a little bit through the trajectory of RIM and then BlackBerry. But let's just fast forward to one question. When you at its peak, how many people did BlackBerry or sorry, RIM employ?
About 15 or 16,000.
15. So from a dozen
Yeah,
to what's that, a factor of 10,000, 10,000x
1,000.
or something? Yeah. Well, you're good
1,000.
at math. I'm not.
Well, 12 to 12,000 is 1,000. So
So that's pretty amazing. So that's a scale up. So let's talk a little bit about the BlackBerry. It is really, really hard for people who didn't live through it to really appreciate the BlackBerry. And I was really fortunate to get a BlackBerry really early in my career. It was because I had to be in touch, like I had information that other people didn't have, and I would be on the bus coming to work, and people would be coming up to me and going, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Can I see that? Can I touch that? Can you really send email? Can you really look at your calendar?" Talk to us a little bit about those early days. When did you know you had something?
Uh, well, we were seeding units in September '98, and that was two things going on. Our CFO Dennis Calverman was at a investor conference for Wit Soundview, a boutique then, and then some of our sales guys, led by Don McMurtry and Patrick Spence, were at a Microsoft Exchange conference called MEC, and they both sort of showed these units, and the response was just out of this world. And we hadn't even launched it yet; we were just piloting it, and we'd had a lot of bullying by the Bay Street in terms of how they roll. Some things never change, but then the U.S. investors became very, very excited in what we could do, and they started buying the stock because they thought this was hot, and the stock just started running kind of, and then we listed on the Nasdaq in January '99. So the whole thing just became this momentum structure that just kept going and going and going. There wasn't a big step function. It was just
Just
increasingly rolling
hyper spread.
thunder
Yeah.
from kind of September '98, and then we did a big financing for, at the time was a lot, about $250 million US in the fall of '99. Yeah, it was going fast.
And then you mentioned September. I'll talk about another December that's a tragedy, which is September 2001. But the BlackBerry played an interesting role during September 11th, 2001. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, what we were using these dedicated data networks, and they're packet switching, whereas back then the cellular networks, they're circuit switching. So the circuits were all jammed. Of course, everybody's on the phone all the time, and nobody is hanging up the phone if they got a line, whereas packets queue up, and so the cell phone networks didn't work in 9/11, but BlackBerry did. And so it was working in Washington, and when the plane hit the Pentagon, the part where it hit took out their IT servers, but people who were using them, and then a couple politicians in the bunker, they could get information to what's going on, and then people in Wall Street and elsewhere it was working. So everyone just like, wow, what is this stuff?
It was like, wow, this is incredible.
It works.
Nobody else can communicate, but look at me.
Yeah.
I've got this thing on my belt. And back then we used to put it on our belts, and look, it still works.
Yeah. It was a big deal.
One of the things, you mentioned it in a technical sense, but I want to kind of bring it down because not a lot of people, including myself, are very technical. What you said, that's another way of saying that the BlackBerry kind of sipped broadband. Is that fair to say? It was
Well, it wasn't broadband, it was narrowband at the time.
Narrowband,
But you
thank you.
queue up packets, and you just eventually get your time through. So it could be fairly busy, but you're queuing up, and just you get your spot in the slot, everything's queued up, and your packet just goes through, and the packets are few and they're relatively small. Whereas a circuit, when you turn on the circuit, that's it, nobody else. If you're out of circuits, you're out of circuits, and somebody keeps talking, that's it. But yeah, so that's why everything could get through. And we had a pin type peer-to-peer structure. We ended up putting a chat app on top of it called BBM, but you could go person to person without going through a server. So in the case of the Pentagon, when the servers got taken out, they could still communicate peer-to-peer, and away you go.
again, revolutionary. And I don't want to give up any trade secrets here, but in the government of Canada, the pin was not an unused feature amongst people that had Blackberries back then.
Yeah.
Now, there were a few people who, when they became even president, and I remember President Obama, but I think also President Bush, they, when they became president, people were going to take away their BlackBerry for security reasons. And they both kind of said, yeah, no, figure it out. You are not taking away my BlackBerry.
Yeah, for sure. And Jeb Bush particularly liked his too, and people did. And he had his official portrait with it beside him on his desk. And yeah, Obama did too. Yeah, lots of people did. It was part of how they did what they did and lived their life the way they needed to.
Now, we're going to talk about this more in I think the third area, but let's just stay on this for a moment, because a lot of people didn't call it the BlackBerry. They called it the Crackberry, which meant like, oh, wait, I got to check my BlackBerry. I got to check my BlackBerry. I got to check my BlackBerry, which has features of addiction. But, and this is very important, it seems to me, addiction wasn't the business model like it was, say, if you fast forward another 15 years. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we sold privacy, and so everything was encrypted. People used it a lot because they liked it, because you could get a competitive advantage, you could connect with people. But that's very, very different than the social media business model, where they surveil you and they profile you, and they use algorithms to make addiction, principally by triggering negative emotion. There's none of that in our product ever.
So you weren't trying to go, oh, look, Tyke uses this 2 hours a day. Let's try and get him to use it 3 hours a day.
No, we have no window into that. And we were just put on the cell phone bills when people sold it, eventually when it had cellular features on it a couple years later. So it was a business model based on use of the service. It was a flat fee, and the carriers priced it as carriers know how to price.
Exactly. Now, you got to like the zenith of the commercial world. It is very rare for a Canadian company with Canadian co-CEOs, with Canadian research, to take something, not only get to the very top of the global commercial system, but to stay there and to change the rules. Tell us a little bit about some of the things you learned along that arduous journey.
Well, it's demanding, but then it seems normal, but it's extremely demanding. It's just crazy fun because you're just going fast and you're having experiences. You change the world and meet people and still stay in touch with people. That is really a remarkable part of it. But most importantly, I was very fortunate to have some commercialization mentors in the United States where there's no, and I was on the US Business Council where these are public-private structures. And I remember seeing the issues we were encountering in terms of standards, in terms of certifications, in terms of intellectual property and the geo stuff in India and Indonesia and the Middle East and Russia. And we're very fortunate that the US State Department kind of saw us as an American company. So they would go to bat with us. And yeah, that was the tremendous learning for me because it wasn't what I'd been taught in undergrad, that this was an emerging structure.
So you weren't just, let me just rephrase that slightly. You weren't just selling something. You were also getting a world of data, literally from all over the world. You were kind of learning how Americans think and work, how Europeans think and work.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, many things. One, dozens of, at any one time, of intellectual property files, and the stakes are very, very high. Lots of issues of localization of the servers that countries wanted for security. Tremendous amount of lawful access issues, which telcos had to comply with for national security. And people get rhetorical about it because, we're good, but somebody else isn't good. But if Chechens have bombed your subway station in Russia, or Iranians want to bomb the Emiratis into the sea, well, I mean, the people are trying to look after their societies, and yes, nobody's a saint in it. And so you're navigating those issues, crazy geopolitical issues of certification and features. The parliament in Indonesia was having a big issue because people could use the browser to access adult entertainment sites, which were blocked through the traditional things. Many things like that. Yeah, it was always everywhere, all the time.
I think we've just discovered why, one of the reasons why you've been so ahead of your time in these issues for the rest of us mortals, whether it's sovereignty, whether it's privacy, whether it is who has access to what, when, under what terms, what do they do in this regulatory regime versus that regulatory regime, what are the rules versus what actually happens. Like these are very contemporary issues in Canada in 2026, but sounds like you were dealing with those issues as a co-CEO.
Yeah, but they've been convention around the world for 25 years. So it's not that I'm ahead of the world. I'm just explaining how the world is.
Because you went into the world
I'm in the
and you
world, and
brought
every
it
other
back.
country's navigating these things.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was getting messages from somebody who's working on these files in Africa. I believe it's Nigeria today, and they're they've set all their standards. They've got their sovereign compute established. They're very focused in designing sovereign healthcare data. The world has operated like this for a long time. So I did find it strange and low functioning, the resistance to somebody trying to characterize what they're dealing with in the world, and those that haven't dealt with the world telling you that no, that's not how the world works. But that's kind of a domestic policy malaise. And I had to decide whether I just fold my tent and say I'm out, or say I shouldn't let these people sell short the future for all the good Canadians that want a better future.
So the penultimate thing in this section, um, let's, it seems to me you also saw a little bit of the future between where the value proposition was going to be. Was it going to be in the device or was it going to be in the stuff that went into the device, i.e. the software. You talked a little bit about BBM, you talked a little bit about pins. I think for most of us, we would go, wow, well, the money is obviously in the car. The money is obviously in the chair. The money is obviously in the computer. But you and a few others, I think, saw that differently.
Yeah, well, the world, what was happening was we were a mini monopoly when we came out, where you could tie the hardware to the service. But by a couple things happened. One, we came out with a product. Mike wanted to do a product that had a clickable display called the Storm, and it didn't work. We got 100% returns. And because of that, Verizon went to use Android's new OS with Motorola, called it Motorola Droid. And then AT&T at that time, I think it was Bell South at that time, they were pushing this iOS iPhone. And so for us, I'd spent about a year and a half with the carriers to get them to put our BBM on third-party devices. It's because we were doing richer media, pictures, saving, video, all basically social media equivalent at the time. And yeah, it was open BBM 2.0 or SMS 2.0, whatever you want to call it. And also nestled into that a mobile wallet for your credentials at the time. And then we had a new CEO. We just reported a quarter of $5.2 billion on a $20 billion year, but we were making well over $1 billion. All our profits were on the services, about $1.1 billion a quarter. And then Mike and the new CEO didn't want to do that. They canceled that plan because it would kill hardware. But what I felt, I said, hardware's already dead. But what it did do is killed the services, because you wouldn't buy a phone that could only talk to somebody else with the same kind of phone. And so that was all of our profit. And at the time, we had more profit on our services than Facebook had revenue, and we had far more users than WhatsApp. So I felt that had killed the business model, it killed the company. And that was early 2012. So I resigned from the board and sold my shares, and they were very excited with a new OS and BB10, and thought that was going to be their, as they would call it, their Jesus phone.
And that's a little bit of the classic innovator's dilemma, where the thing that made you the thing, which in BlackBerry's case was the physical BlackBerry, kind of stopped some people from seeing what was the next thing. Now, the last question.
Business models change.
Yeah.
That's the one thing, is business models can change, and you have to shift and structure your business models.
Now, the last question on BlackBerry before we go on to the next section of our three-part conversation here. What did it mean that BlackBerry was a Canadian corporation? What did it mean that Research in Motion was headquartered in Kitchener-Waterloo? What did it mean that, you went on Team Canada trips with the Prime Minister and things like that?
Well, I thought it was very, very helpful that Jean Chrétien wanted to help sell Canadian products, and he's a friend to this day. Yeah, and it's kind of how the world should work. You kind of bat for your team, and so that was the idea, that you help your own companies was great and necessary and constructive. And for us, most people thought we were kind of an American company, and so and that was helpful too. And when you get the geopolitical bullying, to have the State Department, U.S. State Department with you, was very, very effective, because these are public-private structures, and Ottawa's been captured by a naive and sentimental conception of neoliberalism, that it's a rules-based international order, not understanding that power always was there and power always is there, and when there's power, there will be leverage. And so you have to think in terms of power, or you're going to miss the plot.
So that's a little bit in our third, or maybe in our second too. But let's now move on to our second kind of thing that you are really known for, which is starting to seed and to build institutions. Let's talk about your first one, popularly known as CG, the Center for
International Governance Innovation.
International Governance Innovation. Why did you put a bunch of your money behind that?
Well, you should. I have certainly no regrets doing it. I believed that we need to have this capacity on the global stage. Paul Martin was finance minister at the time, and he offered to support it with me because he was trying to do the L20, which came to the G20, and he was bothered that he would always have to go to U.S. think tanks because we don't have a tradition of think tanks in Canada. We tend to have these small pay-to-play shops, and so that was the genesis. And for me, it did its different things, and I was very busy, so I wasn't as involved in it. But when I retired, I tried to turn it and encourage it, a tighter aperture to these contemporary economic structural realities, because while it seems narrow, it's in fact the mediation structure of security, prosperity, and social well-being. But at the time, it was a looser conception of what it could do. But that's how I got into it. Paul Martin. Yeah.
So you liked that so much, you started funding and seeding and creating a few others. Tell us about a few of them.
Well,
Maybe one at a time.
The other thing is, I was asked by Ban Ki-moon to be on the UN High Panel for Sustainability, and as a private sector representative for Rio Plus 20, which was all fine, and I led the group writing Chapter 4 on reforming economics, and understood the fusion between the scarcity of natural capital and economic structures, and disclosure was a biggie, and standards were biggie, and they're still the discussions to this day. But part of it is I was on got a chance to go on an icebreaker through Northwest Passage, and there was a bunch of political thinkers there, and policy thinkers and senior civil servants, which was great. And we went by King William Island, and there was a Russian flagship, not Russian, but a flagship, maybe tourism, I don't know. But the people from the government were lamenting that we don't have a plan to search for the Franklin ships. And so I said, what do you need? And they said, we need a vessel. And so that started the Arctic Research Foundation. And it's been a lot of funding over the last 15 years, 16 years. And we have several vessels, several terrestrial stations, maybe 4 or 5 vessels. We're just buying another one. And then a dozen or so science stations on land in the Arctic.
So that's number 2.
Yeah.
What was your third?
I would say Council of Canadian Innovators. What really, really bothers me is that we have a lot of people in Canada who have never commercialized ideas on the global stage, and they articulate that we have a lazy business class, but that we have this brilliant policy class that's got it all right, and these folks aren't smart enough to open up their wallets and let the checks fly in.
And I think I read an article where you were quoted, I think it was in the Globe and Mail, where there was kind of a clerk of the Privy Council. Former clerk of the Privy Council, who said something like, we government have done everything brilliantly. I'm paraphrasing. We've done this brilliantly, we've done that brilliantly, we've done this third thing brilliantly. The reason why we can't do A, B, and C is because of the business sector in Canada.
Yeah, they're complacent, yeah. And it's very lazy thinking, very lazy economics, very flawed policy conception, and not attuned to what successful ones around the world are doing. So I was approached by the editor of the Globe and Mail. They were relaunching the business section, and I wrote I think about a 5,000 word piece on we can compete, but we'll not win with our current approaches. And they've all really stood the test of time, what I said.
And this is like 2015,
That's correct. It was May
2014.
2015. And I was working on these. I was chairing STDC, the clean tech organization. And so I put this out there, and it was really to say, this is ridiculous how this is being approached. And there's a very good piece in the Globe today by Natalie Raffoul and Neil Desai saying we give away all our best stuff. That's what I was saying then, and we still do it today. And then I got quite a bit of feedback from people to say help. So I was John Ruffalo was running Omer's Ventures. They had a bunch of their tech companies, D2L, Shopify, many like that, and all their founders and CEOs. And so he said, will you come and talk to them? And so I explained to them, and I showed all these politicians and governor generals and educators, everybody on the public sector who had never done a day of what they do, telling them that they're lazy. And then I explained what these other firms are doing in Europe that I've encountered, and the US and all these other things. So then they were pretty riled up, and then they said, will you help us? And I said, well, I'm not really looking for more work. And then I was talking to my wife, and she said, if you rile people up and don't help them, you're kind of a jerk. And so that started Council of Canadian Aviators. Said, okay, I'm chair of that with John Ruffalo, and it's advocating only for Canadian companies for Canada's benefit.
Now we're bleeding heavily into our third section, but let's stop the bleeding for a moment. Any other institutions you want to mention here?
Well, one of the things I've been dealing with this, and I'll be testifying a bit on this to the Defense Industrial Strategy, is there's very sophisticated legal frameworks of plumbing that go between, like Trump has launched a new group at the US Patent Office for standard essential patents for their SMEs to go globally. And then when he quit 66 organizations last month, he stayed 3 and doubled down them: ITU, IEC, and ISO, because they're all standard setting. And
These are global institutions.
Global institutions to basically, and there was many other things they did to jackhammer US standards and IP into global value chains, and they operate as an entity. So he bullies, but there's a method to the madness. That's why their economy has gone so fast, unequal as it is. So when I used to do RIM stuff around the world, I would encounter all these CIO councils where CIOs architected what they want, architected their standards, architected their procurement, and say they'll move as a kind of a pack. And they're very coherent. The Germans, the Dutch,
the Chinese.
I'd never presented to China, but certainly America. There's 2 of them, the Research Board and the CIO Strategy Exchange. And I thought, I never saw anything like that in Canada. And I'm saying, where do you do this? And there was no place for this. So that was starting the CIO Strategy Exchange that we morphed to the Digital Governance Council, because it was much more, the digital issues were much beyond the CIO at that time. And again, it's architecting very front-footed what you want in your approaches. So that was another.
Let's talk about one last one really quickly. Center for
Digital Rights?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, part of it is that...
like, what's a digital right? Like, don't we just have rights?
Well, the digital era has really hijacked most of traditional rights, but in a novel way. But you never thought you'd need freedom of agency, but it's taken away your agency. Who would have ever thought their identity would be hijacked, and through pornographication and misinformation, the right to knowledge, to know what's real and not real, so on and so forth. The body politic has been hijacked. But pretty simply, the CIO Strategy Council, Digital Governance Council, that's what the CIOs want. CCI, that's what the companies want. And CG, there's a church and state, I'm chair, but they run it and do their programs. But I wanted a place where there was issues that I could do what I wanted. And so I was very active with Shoshana Zuboff on the government's effort to privatize government to Google in our largest city. And then thereafter, it's moved to issues like the funding the BC litigation for political parties. So it's where I get to do what I want to do.
So let's move into our third and final area, which is policy. And you're playing a lot in policy today. You have been playing a lot in policy, probably as our viewers have seen by now over the last 10 years. But I think recently, in the last 3, 4, 5 years, you've kind of come to the forefront in terms of Globe and Mail, giving speeches, testifying in Parliament. Now, for me, public policy is an outcome of the interplay between ideas, institutions, and interests. And if you don't look at each of those things together, like sometimes interests are more important, sometimes ideas are more important, sometimes institutions are, but that kind of dance between those three things is what really matters. And you play and have played on all three of those. Let's talk about some of the policy issues. You are a well-known critic of what I think maybe provincial, but for sure, federal government policy has been, let's call it over the last decade. Tell us
30 years.
30 years, okay. Tell us what are some of the things that bother you in terms of you see this and people in Ottawa see that.
Well, the job of public policy in the broadest sense of the word is to put wind at the back of the values that you seek, not put wind in the face. And so the policy architecture in Ottawa and in Bay Street and in the provinces is rooted in 1970s thinking. But when you go to an intangible economy, it's a rentier economy, not a production economy. And that means it's absolute advantage where you can be landlord 10 out of 10 times, and it doesn't fit normal comparative advantage models. It leads to strategic behavior. So all Trump has done is just do exactly what Biden has done, but turned up the volume a little bit more and put brutish words to it. But Biden kept everything Trump did and then added the Line 5 stuff, canceling the Keystone.
So let's pause and go back, because a
canceling
lot of
the lumber stuff,
Right.
Buy America. Biden did no favors to Canada, nor should he. That's not his job.
Let's go back a little bit, because a lot of our viewers, you kind of lost them at intangibles, you lost them at rents, you lost them at... So let's go back. What is an intangible?
Well, an intangible is a negative right where you have value in an asset based on legal frameworks that change all the time.
Now, you're wearing a lovely jacket.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome very much. Tell us the difference between the tangible part of the jacket and the intangible part of the jacket.
Well, the person who makes this jacket maybe gets $50, but then the person who sells it, you don't want to know how much they get for it, but it's a lot more than that. And so so the design of this jacket is a negative right. So you have the right to stop somebody from copying that design. And in the 70s, that was a very small part of the economy, but now it's become dominant part of how the wealth is created in an economy. And if you don't play in that, then you're just playing in a low value added developing economy space.
But it's a little bit more than that too, though, isn't it? Because if I make that jacket and you buy that jacket, the person who has kind of physically made that jacket, they can't sell it to somebody else.
No, and it's generally on our disintermediated supply and production chains, that was generally outsourced to low cost economies. And so they would get subsistence wages, and then the person who owned the design would get enormous rent on the design, and they get it each time the jacket's sold. And so what happens is the people who owned intangible assets, the capital of intangible assets, got increasing returns, very, very wealthy. And those that did the work got less and less and less. So that broke the relationship between labor and capital. And our policy apparatus just focused on the labor part of the work, particularly through branch plants, not on owning the capital that brought the wealth and the security.
Now, every announcement in Ottawa of every time a dollar goes somewhere, it's always, and this will create 17 jobs, and this will create 200 jobs. And, we're bringing global company X here, and they're bringing 78 jobs with them. Talk to us about why that is the right or the wrong metric.
Well, first of all, it's not true. And second of all, it's gaslighting. And third of all, even if it was interim valuable, those are all going there. They're all going away. So if you've seen the announcements last week, Toyota's putting in robots to take out workers in Southern Ontario, and pretty soon all these Amazon warehouses will be pretty much lights out. And so
Dark factories.
rather than the government policy, rather than focusing on Canadian innovators, they focused on these branch plants, not understand, and then they called, if they were going to put $5 billion in here, they go, look, I brought $5 billion of investment. Well, $4 billion of that is their machinery or their technology. And so that's not an investment where they come and write a check in here and you get the spillovers and that's them bringing their technology here. So it's a sale for their companies. So it was all funny math. It was all not properly construed. And what it meant is we were taking a developing economy strategy where we were doing a small value add for a shrinking number of people with no sovereign control, none of the wealth effects, none of the tax base, none of the supply chains. And we wonder why we've had an erosion over this past 25 years.
Talk to us a little bit about the differences as you see them between kind of, let's call it research, innovation, and commercialization.
Well, innovation for the purposes of economy is the commercialization of ideas. So they're synonymous, but we conflate our policy discourse conflates the invention research with the innovation. It's not innovation until you get money. And so we had
I'll say that again, because I think this is a big point. You just said it's not innovation until you get money. That would
Right.
surprise a lot of people.
Well, because that's commercialization. That's collecting checks. And everybody's friendly until money's involved. And every country thinks the $1 billion is better in their pocket to pay for their hospitals and social programs and railways than ours. And yet we had a naive conception from the policy community that this is a shared destiny. So we had foreign firms getting our IP from our research overwhelmingly. We still to this day have no strategy to capture the benefits from the billions we invest in research every day. We have no strategies to make our data an asset, even though it's a factor of production. And these are security things also. So we wonder why our productivity erodes.
But that's on purpose, right? Like for many, many years, you said probably 3 decades, maybe a little bit more, or maybe not. Actually, if we go back 3 decades, it's like we will invest in research. We will invest in idea generation. And then the market will take care of everything else. That's a fallacy, according to you.
Yeah, of course, it's a complete fallacy of this. The joke I say is America talks Jeffersonian, but rules Hamiltonian. We talk Hamiltonian, but rule Jeffersonian. And then we get these peers, so we're true neoliberal, and then when our stuff doesn't commercialize, they say, well, look at our research, it's all peer cited. They go, oh, they manufacture another myth. We have weak receptors. And in fact, no, there's nothing to be
Back
received.
to the lazy business community.
Yeah, there's nothing to receive. They never filed the IP, or it's all gone by the pre-structured relationships with big global companies. And no other country in the world gives away their ideas or gives away their data or orients their economic development strategy to foreign branch plants, save and except developing countries. because that's a step in the development ladder. But no developed country does that. So we've taken a pole position and gave it away.
So, but we've done it as a feature, not a bug. It's not like we are actually, oh my God, we didn't expect this to happen.
Well, it's because it's rooted in a 1970s production economy where when you open up a branch plant, you bring technology with you, you bring management with you, you develop a supply chain, you charge taxes based on the work done, you export the produced goods, the research is co-located with the production. But not to pick on anyone, but what's Facebook's supply chain in Canada? Or any other big company, and I'm not trying to pick on Facebook. It doesn't. Microsoft Canada's headquarters is in Ireland. The wealth effects abroad. The senior management's abroad. These are simply cheap dev shops or sales shops to pull the rents and the IP and the data out of the country. So the spillovers, the economic spillovers, work exactly opposite. But we used a toolkit from a time, we still to this day use a toolkit from a time that was then, and what's happened very pronounced is all these chickens are coming home to roost. And if you've seen the manufacturing jobs collapsing in Ontario, that was highly, highly predictable. And I was trying to articulate to say this is gonna blow up. Now there's some humility, but it's kind of like somebody who smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day and turned 55 and said, okay, maybe I should think about it.
It seems to me that another way of saying what you just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong. It seems to me one of the ways of understanding what you just said is we missed the shift from multinational corporations to international corporations. We still work under a mindset that there are multinational corporations, whereas actually the big corporations, they're no longer multinational, they're international. Is that correct?
I would say it a little differently, that macro policy is really designed on a theory of the micro firm. And when the structure of the micro firm changes, your macro policies have to adjust. Yes, there's a place for stable banking and stable interest rates, of course, but if it's in fact all about capturing the capital of these rents, which are now 90% of the value of the Standard & Poor's 500, and our strategy is to give away those rents or to be neutral on those rents and everyone else is going to be predatory, it's because they didn't understand the theory of the firm. They thought a foreign firm is as good as a Canadian firm, because if you're making bricks or an oil upgrade or a pulp and paper mill, well, that's just jobs and supply chain. But if in fact it's about getting this enormous amount of rent and control and wealth effects, and none of the spillover stay domestic, then your macro strategies have to understand how that works at the firm, and they have to change. And this was a heavy heartbeat of change, really picking up pace around 2000. And it's just accelerated ever since. But if you're just thinking jobs, you're missing where all of the true spillovers come from.
Now, you're also a very high and strong proponent for privacy. You mentioned Professor Zuboff, who was one of your professors back at Harvard. She wrote kind of, I would think, the book on this, Surveillance Capitalism. You also had a very public interaction role with Google Sidewalks, where you talked a lot about issues of privacy. Why is privacy so important to you?
Well, many people have worked on this file for a long period of time, and they've focused on the human rights of it very legitimately. And in the digital sphere, the violation has gone up more and more. I really focused on the economics of it, that we're taking ourselves out of the economic engine. And the government wanted Google to privatize government in Toronto. And we have some of the top smart city companies in the world who are completely driven out of it. And then Google would just take all the value and knock these companies out of business. And somehow this was supposed to be good for Canada. It made no sense. In fact, it was subversive at every level. And then you had 3 levels of government with it. You had many parts of Bay Street on it. You had the most powerful corporation in the world. And the rest of the world thought Canada had lost its marbles. And it had. And so do you let the bullies win? And there was a tremendous good people in civil society that were emerging, people I never met, who all were voicing their own concerns, and we decided to push back.
Our last topic. Talk to me a little bit about a word that is easily rolling off the tongues of Canadians and policymakers and our elected officials these days, but really, it's fair to say we weren't talking about it that much a little while ago, and that's the S word, sovereignty. Why were you talking about sovereignty before a lot of us were talking about sovereignty?
Well, because that's how the world works. We don't go to the Olympics and say it's a kumbaya, we're all in this together. We're happy to go to the Olympics, but everybody is fighting for the same gold. And we want the gold, not them. Yet for some reason, we thought giving the gold away to the other countries was going to make us okay. And it's a particular form of self-subversion and perpetuated by people, I might add, were not out there fighting for global purchase orders and not understanding that all these other companies are hand in glove with their countries.
Including the Americans.
Nobody more. And our government was, what the US government and the Canadian government had in common is they were both focused on supporting American companies. And our firms were progressing in spite of the public policy, not because of it. And then they say, oh, you're not scaling, there must be no fire in the belly. It's remarkable.
Wrap us up here. You don't need this platform to talk to anybody, but this is a platform that is mostly watched by public servants.
Good.
What do you want public servants to know that what you think they need to know to do their jobs in 2026 and beyond?
Yeah, the most important thing for the public servants, the path to learning is acknowledging what you don't know. There is a monster blind spot that is half the global, half of the global economy, macroprudential stability, stable payments, whatever, good governance. But this whole other element of frameworks, you have to learn what you don't know and understand the war going on and the predatory behavior there so that we can get in there and get our fair share of the prosperity, security, and social well-being.
Jim Balsillie, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to share with us a little bit of your insights, a little bit of your energy, and a little bit of your experiences.
Pleasure's all mine, Taki, anytime.